I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand! Men of the West!
Welcome back to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP. My brother Peter is again not able to be here with us. He's out at Bullock learning how to serve our country better. But we have a soldier here to talk to today. Before I introduce the soldier, I wanted to say PinedoBrothers.com is live. We, the Pinedo Brothers, are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. And if you want to learn more about what our mission is and how to be a part of it, check us out at PinedoBrothers.com. We've got a lot of goodies, and podcast listeners that subscribe and click email JP will get a first look at our next production that Peter and I are working on. So it's exciting stuff. Now, on to more exciting stuff. William Langley, thank you for joining me today.
It's always fun.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Will and I, we go way back. Back in high school, we were getting into trouble together, getting in fights, breaking things, as people are wont to do, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that can pretty much sum it up.
And well, since then you've gone on to break things professionally. In other words,
it's really nice when your childhood pastimes can become a professional pastime too, you know?
Yes, 9 years as a soldier and done it well. And folks, it is the morning here. We're recording this in the morning. We won't drop it in the morning, but we're recording in the morning. So in good Catholic fashion, we're drinking anyway. Cheers, my friend. So 9 years in the Army. Are you able to speak about like what branch you're in and all that, a little bit more detail about?
Yeah, so I've been infantry 9 years, so a mortarman, officer, range of jobs, from just a regular team member to a platoon sergeant and stuff like that. So I've had a wide range of experience in different formations and recon, airborne, and stuff like that too.
Nice. Okay. And in good soldier fashion, you don't go. I've always admired that about you. You've never been one for tooting your own. Like, you don't come back and say, "This is all these cool things that I've done," and all these and you peasants that, you civilians or things like that. Because you do hear that from time to time. I'm sure civilians are a little bit frustrating to soldiers. I get that. I'm sure that we are. But thank you.
Well, I mean, it's like, I have done some things that most people would consider cool, but what I've learned is that the cooler the thing is, the more suffering is involved doing it. The more it sucks to do,
That's an interesting lesson. It sounds like something what Peterson would say, that which is most meaningful is the least expedient, oftentimes. Well, okay. Today we're talking about, you wrote a fascinating essay, and when I read it, I was like, Will, let's see if we can talk about it. Yes. You talked about how this is the time of the Shirefolk, and it was fascinating. I think what I'm hoping you and I can talk about is get your soldier's perspective of what we can learn from Lord of the Rings. We're both huge fans. I remember talking about it as kids, Lord of the Rings, and how amazing we thought those books were. So can you say anything? How has Lord of the Rings influenced you as a soldier?
I mean, it's hard to say how it's specifically influenced me. I know it's influenced me greatly. It's probably my most read set of books. I've read them most likely 10 plus times all the way through, with specific readings countless times in between. So overall, it's had a very large influence on my life. And a lot of the ideas I get and a lot of my aspirations come from from kind of looking up to the characters in Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is a great role model. But if I had to choose one thing specifically that influenced me, I think it would be a quote by Faramir, and I'll just read it real fast. It says, "I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend." And for me, that's the ideal that soldiers should strive towards. Is a good soldier shouldn't love killing, shouldn't love war. He should try to avoid war. But what he should love more is his country, his family, his God. And so he's willing to sacrifice a lot, even his own life, to defend that. And that was a ideal that really inspired me. And so
That's beautiful.
yeah, it helped me make my decision to join the Army.
That's beautiful. I want to follow up to that. In your day-to-day, do you run into soldiers that think the same way, that have that same motivation that you just expressed?
Definitely I do. I would say it's a little more rare than I would like. And a lot of them are doing it. A lot of soldiers are doing it because it's a job, because it makes money, which is a fair reason to do something, because you do need a job, you do need to make money. I have met some soldiers with more base motivations, but there have been, and I've surrounded myself and I've made plenty of friends that have similar motivations as I do. There's a wide variety, as you might expect in any profession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I see that in my profession. I'm sure, yeah, any profession is like that. Okay, well, Will, you've always been, as you would put it, a pretentious student of philosophy, as well as a soldier. And in your essay, you mentioned that now is the hour of the Shirefolk. What does that mean? What does that line mean? And who are the Shirefolk?
All right, so for those unfamiliar with Lord of the Rings, the Shirefolk are the hobbits, and Frodo comes into possession of the Great Ring of Power, and if the enemy possesses it, it's the end of the world, pretty much, as far as anyone can see. And so they have to try to destroy it somehow. And well, they go to the Council of Elrond. That's where that line's from. They finally decide that Frodo needs to take the ring to the Mountain of Doom and destroy the ring. But he's just this little weak, no one hobbit. He's not a powerful elven lord. He's not a wizard. He's not a king of men. He's just this little hobbit. And so Elrond says, now is the time of Shirefolk, and saying that these little small people will shake the towers of the wise. And
So that's the background from the book. How does that apply to our situation?
So let me read the quote in full to give context.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love reading quotes in full.
Yeah.
That's something that we do on this show a lot. So thank you.
This is the hour of the Shirefolk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. Who of all the wise could have foreseen it? Or if they are wise, why should they expect to know it until the hour has struck? And earlier, Gandalf says, it is wisdom to recognize necessity when all other courses have been weighed, though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. Well, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy, for he is very wise and weighs all things to nicety in the scales of his malice. But the only measure that he knows is desire for power, and so he judges all hearts. Into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. So what they're saying there is that they're faced with this great and terrible enemy, and what the great and terrible enemy expects them to do is meet his power with power. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we're faced with, it's kind of meeting hate with hate, but hate doesn't cancel out hate. Mm-hmm. What we have learned is love overcomes hate. But the hateful don't see it that way. The powerful don't see it that way. All they understand is power, and that's where Sauron was. And so that applies to us because we are met with this great, powerful cultural force, among other things. And all they understand is power, submission. And we see that with throughout history, great, powerful forces. And of course, the greatest would be the Roman Empire fighting Jesus and the early Christians and martyring them. And they didn't understand how these small people, these witnesses, these martyrs, with their small things could overcome such a great power. But which one is still around?
Right. That's the fascinating thing. You go to Rome and you see the Colosseum.
Yeah.
And then you just look, you can see from the Colosseum, if I remember correctly, you can see the Dome of St. Peter's. And one has fallen into ruin and another now rises above this ancient city. It's a fascinating contrast between that which we believe is eternal and that which is the most powerful thing at the time, the most powerful empire, the most powerful world that we can build passes away.
Yeah. I mean, no one would have predicted the fall of the Roman Empire at the height of its glory. But it's, as history has shown, it has fallen. And they tried to eradicate early Christianity, but these little people, these early Christians, just stood up and witnessed to the truth. And I think that's what the Shirefolk are doing, is they're just there to witness, to do small things that witness to the truth. And that is their hope.
That's I just this weekend watched a movie, A Hidden Life by Terrence Malick. And in case you haven't seen it, it's a story about a citizen of Austria during World War II who refused to take an oath of loyalty to Hitler. And they were imposing a draft to all Austrian citizens, just like Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music.
Yeah.
And because he was, drafted into the army and refused to take the oath of loyalty to Hitler, he was arrested and he was sentenced to death. And people kept saying to him over and over, "What do you hope that you're changing? Like, what can you?" And I think that was the point of the entire movie, was this little tiny person, whose life is now getting smashed like a bug. His wife will be widowed. His children will be without a father, and 3 young girls without a father. And the whole point that Malick was making here is exactly what you said, is that the lives of these unheralded little people that have refused to do evil, that clung to what they believe is good, has changed the course of this world in ways that we'll never know.
Yeah, and that's the entire story of Lord of the Rings right there. Is Frodo, he doesn't set out to destroy the Ring of Power. He doesn't set out on this epic quest. He says, okay, I have to get the ring safe. So I'm going to go to Bree. Gandalf's not there. Well, I guess we have to continue on. He wasn't planning to bring friends, but they come along, and these friends, I mean, they each did small little things that added up. And Frodo never takes one big step. He just does a bunch of small things well, and they add up to the greatest thing in that age of the world. And it's, I think if you want to take a good lesson from Lord of the Rings, that's anybody doing small little things can add up to the greatest thing in this age of the world.
I like that. And it's also a rebuke. That thought is also a rebuke of something that I'm sure you hear often. I hear all the time, that the history of the world is just ridden by power, where it's a lust for power that drives humans to act, to congregate, to order themselves, that economy is explained in terms of power, that empires are explained in terms of power. No, this is an inversion of that argument that goes directly against it, that the world is explained through people not wanting power. Frodo at no point desired power, and that's why he was able to do that which was good.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly the entire point that's not only the entire point of Lord of the Rings, but it's the entire point of the theology Lord of the Rings is based on in some ways. It's the folly, the crucifixion is the folly of God, according to the wise. People look at it, and people that only understand power say, why would the most powerful being in the universe, God, come down as a peasant human and then allow himself to be killed in the most humiliating way when he could have called upon legions and legions of angels, overthrown the Roman Empire and united the world in a single kingdom. And so it's just impossible to understand if you're thinking in the way that men think, not in the way that God thinks.
If you're thinking according to the dictates of reason.
Yes.
And I think that's that perfectly ties in with when you were saying that, I was thinking of Milton. I was thinking of the great anti-hero that Milton wrote in Paradise Lost, Lucifer, who really was just acting in accordance with reason. And he couldn't understand why, like the whole idea of God's unfolding story was so much anti-reason that he could not align himself to it. It was torturing him. And you see that within us as well, where our little human reason that we use, we glorify it to such an extent that we cannot no longer accept that which is beyond it, that we can no longer understand. And that leads to despair. There's so much despair in this age because we often live according to the dictates. I'm not saying reason is bad. Obviously, we could use a lot of reason. We can take it really far.
It's a tool. It's a tool, and tools can be used for evil or good. And what makes reason good is when we use it in accord with the moral law, in accord with God's law, to promote a greater morality and a greater future for everyone. But when we divorce it from God's law, then reason goes astray, and it just creates terrible weapons of war or great depravity or anything. Like these inventions that we create can be used for good or evil. And the only guiding thing that keeps them from being used for evil is the moral law.
What is the moral law when you say that? That's a big term.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say the natural law, the law that's written in our hearts, but ultimately it has to come down to the law of God. And there's different ways we can know the law of God. The natural law, I think, is one we can know through reason. Then you have the dictates of your conscience and stuff too.
Would you say that it's that which the moral law? When I think moral law, I think very basic. I think of I'm a simple person. I'm not a philosopher, I would say. And so, although I do love talking about such things, but I'm very, very much a simple person. And so when I think moral law, I think of the 10 Commandments. I think of Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life and 12 more rules. I was just talking to my wife last night about how she was thinking, we should put up these rules, that we can look at them, and I was like, yeah, the 10 Commandments, 12 rules for life, these dictates, that which allow, they're simple things which allow us to order ourselves with the world around us.
Yeah.
Would you?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I forget who said it, but someone pretty much said that the 10 Commandments are natural law summarized. All the 10 Commandments, we can know that they are good from our reason, from observing what's around us in nature. The one some people might argue with is the ones regarding God, but even then, I would argue that you could know those from nature. Just using reason. But yeah, it's pretty much, everyone knows you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, things like that. And so when we use reason in accord with those laws, then we can elevate reason and use it for a good purpose.
And I think when we fall into trouble with reason is when we use it in a more Machiavellian sense, where, to use a more pertinent example, when we use it as Sauron the White would use it in Lord of the Rings, because that's what do you see I think I want to defer to what you see here. Like, what can we learn from a character like Saruman, or are there better examples in Lord of the Rings of people using reason to bad ends?
I think there's two major examples that are kind of put in comparison to each other of people going bad, of good people being corrupted. And the two great examples in Lord of the Rings, I think, are Saruman and Denethor. And they both are corrupted by the same tool, by the stone, the palantir. And
Denethor might not be as much of a. Who is Denethor?
Denethor, he's the steward of Gondor, father of Faramir and Boromir, and he's ruling the city until the king returns. Aragorn.
Right. And then Saruman, Saruman, the White Wizard, that's head of Gandalf.
Yeah, head of the council, and he's the top wizard, the most powerful being in Middle Earth, except for Sauron.
Right. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Anyways, they both use the palantir to try to gain knowledge, and you could say that palantir kind of in a way represents reason. It's a tool they use to see far and wide and to know more. And that's a thing reason does. And they're both led astray from it because they've lost hope. Because of what they saw, they lost hope. Saruman saw the greatness and the power of Mordor, and he was lulled by that and coveted that for himself and wanted that power for himself. And so he becomes evil and openly works with Mordor. And that's, in a way, the palantir, which you could say might represent reason in a way, leading him astray. And then Denethor, on the other hand, he uses the palantir and he's shown the might of Mordor. And he knows, and he's correct, that he cannot overcome the power of Mordor. It's too great. And he's right, he cannot. Through strength of arms, they cannot overcome it. But that's the counsel of the wise. Like, the wise would say, yeah, this is an impossible fight. Why not just despair? But then you have the folly, the Shirefolk, the little hope that the wise would not take account for. That the good people throwing away power instead of using power. And that's what overcomes the despair that's driven on by reason without hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you run into examples, like firsthand examples? Because I'm a civilian and I know very little about army life. Do you run into examples of that sort of, it's true, you're seeing that which is true. You're using your reason accurately. You're reading the field properly. Like, you are using the palantir, the seeing stone, and you see that which is actually exists. It's not a figment of your imagination. And from that, you despair from it. Do you see that sort of thing in your day-to-day life?
Not to a large extent, I would say, because I think that stuff becomes most evident when we're put in great danger of our own lives and we're forced to choose to act in a certain way to either save or risk our own lives. And on a day-to-day basis, that those situations don't really occur, even in the military or anything. I think military history gives us a good example. A famous example would be, like, I would imagine, would be Benedict Arnold, who betrayed Washington's army. I think he saw that reason said that the Patriots would not win the Revolutionary War, and so he wanted to side with what he thought was the winning side.
It's fascinating. Something we take for granted. We should not have won that war. The British were the most powerful army that the world had ever seen. It's like us losing to I don't want to speak about what's going on in Afghanistan right now, because I think that's a different case, because we didn't actually lose any battles. The British did lose battles. But so this, it would be like us losing a battle to this ragtag group of savages that are running through Afghanistan right now, which could not be the furthest thing from what happened right now. But it happened, back in the 1700s. We did that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a miracle in some ways that America exists right now. I mean, you can talk about circumstances, the French fighting, joining our side, but the French didn't join until they thought we could win, though.
Right.
And the English Empire was very busy all around the world, so maybe they just were like, we don't really need this. But still, they could have crushed us if they wanted to. And I think that's what Benedict Arnold saw. He used reason, and it led to his despair of the cause of the Patriots, and he turned. And I think, I mean, in many ways, I think that happens to a lot of people on a daily basis. It's just not as blown up, it's not as evident. I think a lot of people, even in just personal struggles or relationships or something, they don't trust to hope. Instead, they trust to reason alone, and they give up on something if they had just pushed a little more, if they just took one small step in the right direction, it would have gotten them closer. And then the next day they take another small step. But I think a lot of people see an insurmountable obstacle ahead of them. And so they don't take any steps in that direction. And they just give up and betray their ideals, their goals, or something like that.
What are there? If you were going to convince someone to take that first step, like you were saying, that sort of incremental approach, what would you say are reasons for hope? Because you need to have some reason to hope. And this day and age, we're constantly bombarded with bad news. Like I just talked about something that I'm not going to ask you to say anything bad about our commander in chief or about what's going on. I mean, I do that enough on my own time, but I want you to if you were going to convince someone to say to disregard the outrage that's constantly bombarded, whenever we look at our phone, about the bad news that's happening, what are reasons to hope?
I mean, a lot of it is based on faith, really. I believe, as a Catholic, as all Catholics believe or should believe, I guess, is that Jesus has already won. He's already been victorious. He's already conquered death through his resurrection. And so at the very least, maybe the entire world just continues spiraling downhill. But at the very least, there is going to come a time where Jesus is going to come back and he's going to finalize his victory in a way. So in that at least is our hope. But then also, I think there's a lot of hope. And I think that hope of eternal life, that if we act properly, we will reap the reward of eternal life through the grace of God. I think that it should inspire us to action, because if you really have hope, action will necessarily follow from that hope, because that hope and faith are very interchangeable in a way. You have hope in something you have faith in, and faith requires action. And so we have hope in that Jesus was resurrected, or we have faith that Jesus was resurrected. And so that requires us to act. And it just requires us to maybe beyond reason, something above reason, something with reasons more supernatural than what reason can tell us. We just take one step forward at a time. And I think there are signs of hope in the world if you can look for them. I think a big sign of hope personally for me is Jordan Peterson. I know you mention him a lot, but I was listening to Bishop Barron, and he was talking about what's called the Peterson effect. I don't know if you've heard of that.
What does that mean?
So what it is he's noticed a number of people coming back to either coming back to the church or converting to Catholicism because of what Jordan Peterson teaches. And Jordan Peterson's not Catholic.
No.
He doesn't even speak positively or negatively about the Catholic Church. But what he does do is he tells people to accept responsibility and to put their lives in order. And when you put your life in order, you order it towards something. And if you do it correctly, you order it towards the truth. And as Catholics, we believe the truth is contained in the Catholic Church. So if you're putting your life in order and you're doing it correctly, you are going to be inexplicably led towards the Catholic Church, like it or not. So I think that's a reason for hope. I think there are some major characters out there right now that are leading people in the correct way.
I agree. I think You can invert all of the despair that we hear on its head. You can say, okay, Corona has driven people away from each other, and that there's no longer communication or questions being or discussions, conversations being held, and that's true. Corona has done that, but there also are abilities to have conversations like this, where two old friends can talk about things that are important to them, and then they can share that with other people in hopes that it might be important to others, and others can derive hope from it. You can have these conversations which before were never able to be had. You can listen to thoughts like Peterson. He just dropped another podcast earlier this week that, I mean, it blew me away. I love the idea that I can listen to great minds like that, and then he always has an equally interesting and stimulating person to talk to. And you can listen to Barron. I don't listen to Bishop Barron myself, but I know many people that do. Maybe I should try and listen some more, although I greatly respect what he does. But there's so much that we can learn for free. Like you don't have to have a college education anymore to have the best learning in the land. It's all available to you already. That's
I might even argue you might be better off. You might have a better education by not getting an education at college nowadays, but I mean, that's a different topic.
It's possible. But the fact that that is a possibility, that you can do that never existed. Can you imagine how people of the Middle Age, they used to travel for thousands of miles by foot to get to universities like Salamanca.
To hear great debaters debate each other, or great lecturers lecture and speak.
Right.
But now, we can do it at our fingertips. And in a way, it's kind of sad because it's available, but so many people. Why does Jordan Peterson only have like 4 million followers on YouTube? I mean, it's one of the largest channels.
Yeah,
it's 4 million, anyways. But why isn't it 300 million? Why isn't he the most followed person on YouTube instead of, I don't know who is, probably some pop culture entertainer,
some K-pop person, or some cat.
People have these. It's a sign of hope that he is one of the largest presences on YouTube, as well as some other notable thinkers. I mean, Joe Rogan was one of the largest channels on YouTube before he moved to Spotify, but now, I mean, he's the most listened to podcast. But also we still have so far to go still. But I mean, that's where the hope comes in, is we can make it there.
Mm-hmm.
So far to go, and we can make it there just one step at a time. This podcast, any other podcast, every good conversation that's had, and everyone that listens to a good conversation and thinks about it, is taking us one step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's a treacherous time, but it's also an exciting time. I mean, if there wasn't a chance of great danger and great defeat, then it wouldn't be much of a battle, right? And I mean, I'm not a soldier, but I still relish the thought of doing battle, like going out and facing evil and striving to overcome it. And if there wasn't a chance that I could fail, then that would be kind of a boring story, right?
I mean, I'm a soldier in the literal physical sense, but I think every Christian and every Catholic, including Christianity, obviously, is also a soldier. I mean, you have the whole like cliche little children's song about "I'm in the Lord's army."
Yeah.
But it's true. It's true. We all fighting we're all members of a spiritual battle. And I think that's the chief battle that's being waged right now. Mm-hmm. And we have to have the characteristics of soldiers and we have to train like soldiers if we're going to win this battle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With the understanding that as Tolkien puts it, the fellowship walks on the edge of a knife.
Yeah, exactly. And you stray one way or a little to one way or the other, and great disaster will. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's consequences to that.
Yeah.
But that is somewhat of the spice of life.
But actually, I think the next line is pretty interesting. I think the next line is, "But hope remains while the fellowship stays true."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really we have to stay true to our beliefs. We have to speak the truth. We have to stay true to the truth. We have to remain loyal, and I think that's a very important aspect of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, when I heard you speak about earlier about what you meant by this is the time of the Shirefolk, I internalized it as who are the hobbits? The hobbits are people like me that don't account for the thoughts of the very wise, like Jordan Peterson, or like a Jordan Peterson would be a Gandalf or something like that. The hobbit is someone like me, and maybe someone that listens to, I think the listeners, my fellow hobbits that listen, what are things that you're saying? If you're saying that this is our hour, that this is when we should and must march and move, what are you saying? What are actions that what are hopeful actions that you think we could do?
Well, there's one thing I've adopted this year. I call it the 1% rule. It's actually inspired by Jordan Peterson. But it is, he says often, if you can make yourself 1% better each day, the compound interest on that is ridiculous how much better you'll be in a year or 2 years. Me not being that ambitious, I decided I would try to make myself 1% better each week. And the way I did it is, or am working on doing it, I guess, is 1%. So you have 24 hours in the day. I forget how many minutes that is, but 1% of a day is 15 minutes. But you're only awake for 2/3 of the day. So I broke it down to 10 minutes just to be very modest in my ambitions. Mm-hmm. And each week I set a goal to reclaim and repurpose 10 minutes of my day to make me better. And so maybe it's like read the Bible for 10 minutes a day, go run for 10 minutes a day, work out for 10 minutes a day, or just do something one week that you know you will do. And that's a big thing Jordan Peterson harps on is don't set some lofty goals. Set a goal of doing something you know you will do. Because you could say, I want to run a marathon, but you have to run a mile first. And you have to run, if you can't run a mile, you have to run half a mile, a quarter mile, whatever you can do. You have to take one step in the right direction. And so 10 minutes a day for a week is something anyone can do. Maybe clean for 10 minutes a day. And so that's something I've been doing for a few months now is each week I add on another 10 minutes of something to do. And I found it's actually been so far pretty impactful, I would say.
So how much per week is that now, if you don't mind me asking? Like, what's the total time?
So in total, I think I'm up to 90 minutes, but I also will take a previous week and then change that 10 minutes of the previous week to something more intense. So maybe let's, for example, say your first one was walk for 10 minutes a day because maybe you're not in great shape and you can't run. So then after you walk for 10 minutes a day and you get more comfortable walking and being active, then maybe you change that to run for 10 minutes a day.
I love that.
Yeah. And I found it's been very, very helpful.
I love that. I'm gonna talk to my wife about giving that a shot. I like that a lot. Man, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, any other further thoughts though on a soldier's perspective of Lord of the Rings and what we can take from it?
I think that just the central thesis of Lord of the Rings is to trust and hope. I think that's the entire reason for the quest. That's why they start the quest, is this little fool's hope they have. And that's the entire driving force behind Lord of the Rings is this fool's hope. And what's our fool's hope? Our fool's hope is the crucifixion. And so I think what really the Lord of the Rings is telling us is trust in the crucifixion, I guess, in a way. Yeah,
that's big.
And more so trust in the resurrection, I guess, which followed from the crucifixion. But
yeah, the folly of the wise, and yet, it's gone on to be the central event. We tell time by the crucifixion, but that's the central moment of even if you call it BCE or CE, it's still counted by that same central moment.
You can try to obscure it, but truth still remains.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. It's the other religions would speak of it in terms of like it's the center stone. What would Buddhists say? They center themselves on that which is the center moment of the universe. Where you have your one hand on the ground. And Catholics, we often don't think of terms of meditation, of centering ourselves on that which is Christ, on which is eternal, the central moment. But we are encouraged by the church to meditate on the crucifix, to meditate on the cross. And in that way, we are talking about the central moment of the universe, that ultimate sacrifice.
That's how we begin and end our prayers too, with the sign of the cross.
Right.
It's the center. I mean, when we go to church, we go there to witness the crucifixion.
That's right. I've spoken to that in the past. The Eucharist itself is that central sacrifice which organizes us as a human being, with our Creator, with that which is ultimate. A limited space, a limited individual becomes in touch with that which is unlimited through the Mass. And that is an awe-inspiring thing that we believe that we have access to every day. Talk about riches.
Yeah, I think that's a great hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're hopefully in league with the most powerful, all-powerful being. Not just
and that doesn't mean that we will have an easy life.
No, not at all.
He doesn't make things easy. I think that's another lesson you can get from Lord of the Rings. Not all stories end well. Even if you have that intention and that hope, you don't, there's no guarantee you won't wind up like a Smeagol.
Here's a question for you, actually, though, about talking about story ending well. So in a draft of the ending of the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien had Frodo die at Mount Doom. And obviously he changed it. Frodo lives and he ends up going to the Undying Lands. I'm personally not sure if that was the right choice. I hate to criticize Tolkien because I think he's the great author of the last 200 years or so. But sometimes I think, because the greatest sacrifice is laying your life down for your friends. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if it would have been if the whole story would have hit home more if Frodo sacrificed his life. Mm-hmm. I think about it. I don't want to say I'm right. It's just.
Well, I would, in defense of Tolkien, I think it's a fascinating question. And I think Tolkien, if I was going to try to speak for him, I know that's a huge presumption. He would probably say two things. The first thing, he's not writing a story as much as he's writing mythology, and he would constantly rewrite and then contradict himself in the rewriting, and I think he would even say, well, Frodo dies in the human story, but in the Hobbit story, Frodo comes home, or he would say like, well, in this culture, this is how that story went. And that's that. And then in this culture, because you see that in the Silmarillion, the events are told differently from different perspectives. And he knowingly, I would argue knowingly, some people might say he's just forgetting and contradicting himself, but he's knowingly contradicting himself is my argument, because he's setting about to make that which is more than just a story of mythology. And then the second thing I would say is, for that perspective that we have, the Lord of the Rings, if we're looking at that book as a perspective, the idea that one doesn't just, it's almost an easier idea to die, to accomplish the great thing and then to die. It's more difficult to accomplish the great thing and then have to go and live, have to go back to the Shire and then live with what the aftermath of that.
Yeah. All right. That's a very, very fair point. And I like that one. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I've been thinking about because I just reread Lord of the Rings, which is why I wrote that article I wrote.
I'm glad that you did. Is there a way that people can access it, or is that kind of confidential?
I mean, honestly, like I just will randomly write stuff down and just save it to my computer. Do you have a way you can publish it if you have a way to publish it?
Great, folks. I'll put a link to it in the.
I think the one I sent you had a couple like spelling errors and some missing words. I'll let me check you and send you a new one. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Will, I think we're getting close to having to say goodbye. I really enjoyed the conversation, though.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, it was great. I always love talking to you.
Yeah. That's something that I so much appreciate with having this podcast, is that I'm able to speak to people that I so enjoy speaking to, that we haven't had a chance to talk in a long time. Yeah. And I hope we get to talk again soon, either on the podcast or just you and I.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, any parting things for us hobbits?
Let me share like one thing real fast, I guess.
Please.
So this is an inscription on a archbishop's tomb, and it reads, "When I was young and free, and my imagination had no limits, I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change, so I shortened my sights somewhat and decided to change only my country, but it too seemed immovable. As I grew into my twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me, but alas, they would have none of it. And now I realize, as I lie on my deathbed, if I had only changed myself first, then by example, I might have changed my family. From their inspiration and encouragement, I would then have been able to better my country, and who knows, I might have changed the world."
Great place to stop.
Yeah.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.